Hey guys, welcome to Irish Medieval History, and this week a little bit of a reaction to Vikings Valhalla, but also just the kind of media around Ireland as well at the same time. And also, I'm going to be covering a little bit of Irish medieval clothing around 1066. Why, you may ask? Well, two reasons. First off, I feel in a lot of media, and that's going to include Vikings Valhalla, Ireland never really gets covered in this era, and that's simply down to the fact that nobody knows what's going on in Ireland or much about Irish medieval history. They just kind of go to the default answer of, well, Ireland had a lot of 150 petty little tribes and they were all fighting each other and they were just being cute in the corner, which is far from the truth, which I'm going to cover in a bit. And the second one that I really have a problem with is clothing. Now, the Welsh Viking has already done a bit on this. That's kind of why I kind of wanted to do a bit more on it, really bring stuff out of the surface and problems I have with local Viking media and stuff. And that is just down to all the biker clothing. The Welsh Viking has done numerous amount of videos, and I kind of want to build up on that now about what's going on in Ireland at the time. A lot of people believe that it's full of 150 petty kingdoms or kings or tribes or whatever, and people are running around half naked, so people get very dismissive about it. It's like, oh well, that's Ireland, tiny little island, and 150 kingdoms, not much going on. In fact, there's a lot going on, and in fact, Ireland, not so much in the early stages, but in the later stages of the Norman conquest of England, Ireland was very much a part of it. And it's very interesting that I even say that, the later stages of the Norman conquest of England, because a lot of people have this default answer that England was taken over in one battle. You had the Battle of Hastings, and that was it. England had completely submitted, and that was done. And in fact, there's an entire conquest where the Normans have to painfully go in, take the south of England, move into London, have this big ceremony, and then they go up to the north, and they're just constantly being grinded down in the north. And this is where Ireland comes in. Godwin's sons also had a alliance with the Irish as well, the Irish king Diarmaid MacMail na Mór. Diarmaid MacMail na Mór, who was pretty much king of Ireland at the time. Now, going into 1066, Diarmaid MacMail na Mór had a dispute with the MacLauchlins. The MacLauchlins were up in the north of Ireland, and the MacLauchlins believed that they were the rightful kings of Ireland of their inheritance way back in the early medieval period, just before the rise of Brian Boru. The MacLauchlins believed that they were the ancestors of Niall Nine Hostages, which in return made them believe that they were the real kings of Ireland, compared to Diarmaid MacMail na Mór, who had usurped Brian Boru's family, Donnacha O'Brien. So Donnacha O'Brien got usurped by Diarmaid MacMail na Mór, and so Diarmaid MacMail na Mór was pretty much king of Ireland, except for the fact that the MacLauchlins were his opposition. They pretty much denied him as king of Ireland. That's why you don't really see too many people identifying Diarmaid MacMail na Mór as king of Ireland, just because of the whole MacLauchlin thing, etc., etc. Another interesting thing about Diarmaid MacMail na Mór is his later ancestor, Diarmaid MacMorra, would be allied to the MacLauchlins against the O'Briens later on. So politics is just as fun in Ireland as everywhere else. Regardless, the closest link we have to a king of Ireland at the time is Diarmaid MacMail na Mór, who pretty much dominates Ireland, except for the north, to a certain degree. He's got territory, he's got his allies up there as well. So he's not completely out of the blue. Specifically around the Ullid. The Ullid, the very, very corner, are allied to Diarmaid MacMail na Mór. So he has power and influence there as well. Diarmaid MacMail na Mór has dominance over Dublin, and since he has dominance over Dublin, he's got dominance over the Irish Sea. And Diarmaid MacMail na Mór makes the majority of his profit from the slave trade. Now, if you've done a good bit of Norman history, you'll be aware that the Normans are completely anti-slavery. And that goes down to their relationship with the Pope. They see themselves as a new crusaders. Although crusades haven't started yet, you kind of get the idea of where I'm coming from, that they're holy army coming in. In fact, the papacy had supported William the Conqueror's conquest of England in the first place in 1066. So William the Conqueror comes in, he wins the Battle of Hastings, and then he slowly starts to take over England. With the harrying of the north, things get quite bloody, and that goes on between 1069 to 1070. And between those eras, William the Conqueror says to take over the north. Now, if you quickly look this up in Wikipedia, the Irish are not mentioned once. It's all about the Scots and the Danes. Now, interestingly enough, at this point, Diarmaid MacMail na Mór is allied to both the Scots and the Danes. Now, we all know the Celtic relationship between Scotland and Ireland. That continues throughout. There's not a point where the Irish suddenly turn around and says, oh, we're not friends anymore. There's just a continued alliance always, even to present day, between Scotland and Ireland. I don't really need to go into detail about that. It's literally in the foundation of both Scotland and Ireland, Ireland's Book of Invasions, which is literally the foundation of the bedrock of where Ireland is born. That's one of the, if you're Irish and you haven't read that medieval text, you should. You know, it's really the pride of Ireland, the Book of Invasions, because it's the foundation and the identity of who you are. Doesn't matter if it's not true or not, but it's our mythical foundation. So it should be a book that you should definitely have a swing off of, if you can get a hold of it, that is. And on top of that, you've got the Danes. Now, what's the relationship between Ireland and Denmark? A lot of people believe that the Danes and the Irish, they don't like each other. The Danes came in, they tried to take over Ireland, the Viking Danes. And in fact, that's not true. The Danish king, what you may have had was Viking raiders, Viking pirates, Vikings, coming into Ireland who were Danish. But these Danish Vikings would have had little to no contact with Denmark itself. It wasn't like any noble Viking king or anything is identified as going into Ireland and trying to take it over. And a lot of people think, oh, what about Ivor the Bonus? Ivor the Bonus has no, in reality, in the sagas he does, but in reality, there is no connection between Ivor the Bonus and Denmark. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people, especially Danish people, might turn around and say, no, he was, you know, I read it in the sagas. No connections in real life. In the book, what was it, the Ulster Annals, there is zero, no connection there. Go through the Ulster Annals yourself. The only path we can find is from Norway downwards. The Ivor the Bonus that's in Ireland has no connection to any other form of Ivor the Bonus that comes over from Denmark. None. Zero. So with that out of the way, what relationship does Ireland have with Denmark? In fact, after 1014, around 1014, Sitric Silkenbeard, after the Battle of Clontarf, by the way, starts to make connections with Canute the Great. And from there, Canute the Great is able to bring the Irish Reform, which is a church reform, over to Ireland. And Ireland's able to update all of its church manuscripts and stuff. So Ireland's able to get into the latest fashion of what's happening in the rest of Europe. So Canute the Great is a great connection between Ireland and the rest of the world, especially the Scandinavian world. So Ireland and Dublin specifically really dominates. So when Diarmaid MacMail na Mór takes over Dublin, he connects over with Denmark, and Denmark and Ireland work together to harass the Normans. There's two massive, other than plenty of Viking raiders, so what was taken up most of the time and is very profitable for the Irish Vikings in particular from Dublin is that they're now able to go into the north of England area and harass the Normans. And they can keep doing this over and over again because they're making a profit. They'll go in, raid Pacific areas, come out with slaves and loot, go to Dublin and make a profit. So Irish Vikings are able to continuously do this over and over again. And so are the Danish Vikings. Danish Vikings are able to go in and just keep harassing the Normans. Now the Danes have a few of their own invasions going into England. This video is not about that. It's specifically concentrated on the the Irish Vikings and the Irish. Diarmaid MacMail na Mór sends over two Pacific invasions over. One is somewhat successful in battle, the second one not so much. The biggest problem that Diarmaid MacMail na Mór faces with the Norman invasion is the fact he's also taken on MacLachlan up in the north of Ireland. So he has to take over, try to beat his enemies up in the north, which he fails to do, sadly. Furthermore, the Norman invasion is not going well. What happens up with the northern invasion is eventually William the Conqueror starts to remove the food supplies. William the Conqueror knows he can't keep doing this, especially with Viking raiders constantly attacking Pacific areas, depriving them of food and supplies. The Vikings are very good at that. They'll literally come over by sea and hit Pacific areas over and over again, and they'll constantly go back to loot. Now, this doesn't finish with the harrying in the north. The Irish Vikings will keep doing this over and over again as the Normans go into Wales and stuff with the invasions in the south of Wales. The Irish Vikings keep doing this. They'll keep coming in, hit Pacific areas, and come back with loot and goods. However, as I was saying before, the campaign goes south. What William the Conqueror is forced to do, well, it depends on your historical view, but what William the Conqueror was forced to do, and it makes sense, I suppose, was to go and scourge the north. He basically burned all the fields, destroyed all of the food supplies, because most of his enemies were up in the north. A lot of the northern nobles were against William and wanted to remove William as king. They were supported by the Danish, the Irish, and the Scots. So William the Conqueror basically denied them all food supplies. That starved out the north and ended the campaign. Also, furthermore, Diarmaid MacMail na Mór eventually tries to go up north to the north of Ireland and is killed trying to take over the north of Ireland. Then eventually Turlough O'Brien, who was the nephew of Donogh O'Brien, who got usurped by Diarmaid MacMail na Mór, he takes back that title and he becomes King of Greater Ireland. That's the title he gives himself. And with that then, Murtogh Breen, his son, ends up also known as Murtogh O'Brien. He becomes King of Ireland after him. Very interesting politics, and a lot more information should be done, because a lot of the time historians, especially historians outside of Irish medieval history, will literally just look at Ireland and say, load of petty kings, a load of petty tribes. That's a shame that they're writing the Irish out of a lot of history books. I went through Wikipedia there, and there wasn't a single mention of the Irish in there anywhere, and yet the Irish are continuously harassing the English in there, like. Let's go into clothing. The reason why I'm covering this is that you could go through the entire Vikings Valhalla, and what they will show is continuous biker clothing for the Vikings. The Normans are not the best, but they're better than the Normans. Sorry, they're better than the Vikings. And the Vikings literally are the Vikings. We run around in biker clothes. Vroom, vroom, vroom. We are thick and titty. Whoa, 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 whoa. That's literally the description that they give about the Vikings. Dumb, slow creatures. Compared to the Normans are the sophisticated, civilized people here to civilize England. That's what we see when we look at the clothing. And I'm kind of happy and relieved in a way that the Irish aren't a part of this, because if the Irish were in it, guaranteed we'd be in sheep fur running around the place with our sheep shields and a sword. So I'm kind of, if we're lucky, we might have just axes. That's it. We'll just have axes because we're too primitive. Stone axes. Because I've seen movies where the Irish are literally described like that, and it really is annoying and very insulting. The Irish are far from it. At this point, we know that the south of Ireland is already very much connected with the Normans. There's a lot of wine trade. Now, I was going on about how the Irish and the Saxons at the time were allied and were going up against the Normans, but at the same time, there was actually a lot of trade going in with the Normans. There was tons and tons of trade of wine going into Cork, and also on top of that, Cork didn't just have an alliance with Normandy, we also had an alliance with various places in Germany, and were able to bring that architecture over. Cashel today is one of the best examples of this, as we can find a lot of architecture from Europe, specifically around the German area, is found in that. A lot of architecture influence, as they would say. Which really goes to show that Ireland isn't isolated, it's not barbaric. And furthermore, we'll go into the clothing. Gerald of Wales, who does argue the fact that the Irish are barbaric and very slow, but that's because later on he's trying to bring out an invasion of Ireland. He's trying to justify the great Normans coming into Ireland and civilizing us. And so that's proper Norman propaganda. So it's quite annoying that still today a lot of people are following Norman propaganda. And this is a very good example of that. However, what we can find are traces of truth. And what basically Gerald of Wales does is he gets a small bit of truth and then he blinds it with pure prejudice and not hatred towards the Irish, but pure prejudice, and this kind of turning Ireland from a very majestic island, an island that's different, but different in a really interesting and wonderful way. He kind of gets that and spins it around, that they're different, but in a very weird way. There are weird people who do weird things. For example, they have sex with wolves and animals. And so what he does is he gets various stories that's in, if a very good book to read before Gerald of Wales is actually Irish Myths and Sagas. And in this you can see the various myths of Ireland. And you can literally pick any story in this, and Gerald of Wales gets a lot of these stories and he puts his own spin, his own mix on it, and then he puts it into reality. So where we have the likes of the Fenians who turn themselves into wolves, Gerald of Wales gets that and he turns it into women having sex with wolves. So he puts a real spin on it and then he makes it into reality. It's just an example there. Because there's a lot of connections between the Fenian and wolf boys. So obviously Gerald of Wales must have heard this and then put his own extra spin around it. Regardless, what we can find are tiny hints of truth. And if you look at the drawings that would have been in the manuscript, I'll put up the pictures here of which I'm talking about. We can see the type of clothing the Irish would have worn in this period. Even the front cover there is very much set around the 11th and 12th century. So we have a fair idea of what the Irish are wearing at this point. Remember, the 11th century isn't the Viking age per se. It's not. Just to keep note that we're no longer looking at the 9th and 10th century. We're now going into the 11th and 12th century. So clothing is completely different. What we can see in this point is not so many quarter-length pants anymore. Does that mean we've gotten rid of quarter-length pants in Ireland? No, that's not true. I do believe that the warrior class, in particular the Kerns who are starting to emerge, still have quarter-length pants for their martial arts, that they would have been still part of the dueling system. However, I do believe full pants, full tight pants that was very popular at the time, is also popular in Ireland. And furthermore, this is kind of more of a time of less skirmishes. There's still a lot of skirmishes going on in Ireland. However, we've got more battles. More battles are introduced in Ireland. And with that, you have way more helmets. You have more riveted mail. And that's because we're doing the likes of Battle of Clontarf, the Battle of Tara, and many other battles. Compared to before, where a lot of disputes were handled over cattle raiding. Now the Irish, in particular the Irish king himself, Diarmaid MacMail na Mór, is physically taking land. He's no longer cattle raiding and then forcing the person to submit. He's going right in there and taking that land. He's killing who needs to kill. When it comes down to usurping, he's just cutting their groin off and scarring their face, and he's leaving these people to bleed out. There's a lot of stories at this time between particular rival kings who would have been the equivalent of nobles back in England, and so on and so forth, who will literally remove the genitals of their enemies and leave them bleed to death. Plenty of stories of that. So this is a very bloody time in Irish history. This isn't a thing of, it's all just a banter, it's a laugh. A bunch of lads go out in the field, they take some cattle, then the opposing side comes in and take the cattle back. That's all the banter, the laugh that happens in Ireland. It's what a lot of people enjoy about simple life of Ireland. This isn't it. This is the age of large battles. You have 4,000 on 4,000. Sometimes maybe it's only 400 against 400, but you do have much more huger battles. Now I know it's nowhere near what you see in the Middle East when you have 20,000, 10,000, but this is Ireland and 4,000 is a lot. That is a lot of numbers. In fact, a lot of historians dispute if it got up to those large numbers or not. You've got some numbers that even argue that they go up to 8,000. Regardless, that's not my point. My point being is that people are getting more equipped for larger battles. So with that, you will see more nasal helmets, you see more mail, and you see a lot less people doing skirmish fighting for martial art purposes, but what they are dressing is for battles. So you see more pants involved. You also have saffron, lena, which would go under the riveted mail perfectly. Then you put on your nasal helmet, you put on your regular pants, you then have your normal shoes, and that's pretty much you dress. Oh, and also a cloak, so you put the cloak on over that. That's the default dress in Ireland at the time of the later periods, going up from the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. Now we're up to 1066 with the Battle of Hastings and that whole period. And we know from finds in Dublin, as this is the book that goes into detail, that the Irish Vikings would have gone into England to raid and harass and attack the Normans going into the north, that the Irish Vikings would have been dressed and prepared for this. They would have also been allied in with the Danes and also were trading with the Danes. With that, we've got solid proof that the Danes and Danish historians have fully agreed and love the fact that a lot of their ships at the time were made in Ireland. We found wood proof because it backs up a great alliance between the Irish Vikings and the Danish Vikings as they harass and attack north. Now, we weren't successful in this campaign. However, it does show Ireland as part of the wider world at the time. And that's why I'm kind of glad that the Vikings Valhalla isn't covering this. Looking at the clothing and looking what we've seen, it wouldn't have been great. You know, you would have seen a very backwards Irish people running around in their sheep clothing and stuff. I don't think it would have been anything amazing, to be honest with you. And it would have been very much petty, these little tribal people coming over. Thank God, is all I say. But if you had a much more historical program, yeah, it's a shame that there isn't a more historical program covering this era, because I'm kind of getting really sick of this kind of tribal Irish running around the place naked, covered in blue paint. There's no place for it, you know, and it's just silly, you know. Ireland in the medieval period has this beautiful, unique style, and you know, I can see it's not for everybody, but it colours up the medieval period. You know, it's an extra bit of colour. Anyway, guys, I think that's enough waffle from me today. Hope you learned something. Hope you opened your mind up a wee bit, or even learned a bit more Irish history. As always, guys, if you like the stuff that's going on, definitely subscribe below. Other than that, lads, thanks very much.